The Process, a podcast about creativity and experimental music. In the world of experimental music, outcomes and accolades for creators can be uncertain and at times seem far and few between. Therefore, creators and practitioners of experimental music must embrace the one thing they will always have complete control over: the process. This podcast aims to understand this creative process by listening to new works and discussing them with their creators. Each episode focuses on one creator and their music. Understanding how and why they create can inform aspiring creatives and help audiences better understand and navigate experimental music. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and I'll be your host as we explore the world of experimental music, creativity, and the human need to find purpose in their world and lives. This is The Process. Welcome to The Process. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and today we'll be talking to Robert Dick, who is known as an improviser, as someone from New York, and someone who is an inventor of sorts, and has created new devices for the flute. He's also known as a composer. And all three of those things we talk about today on the podcast. But one of the things that really struck me about speaking with Robert was, of course, his just general affable nature and his humility, even being somebody as experienced and accomplished as he. But just in general, I was in awe of his experience and his certainty. And let me qualify that a little bit. Often on this show, I'm asking composers creative cogitations or about the creative cogitations, and I'm often asking them to sort of quantify or explain their thoughts about some of these. And some of these are really difficult questions, and a lot of them I still haven't answered, even at the humble age of 40-something. We won't get into specifics here. We're all friends. It was very interesting to speak with somebody who had a lot of certainty about some of these questions, and not in a very, shallow way that, he hadn't thought about these or hadn't lived most of these, but in a very, very thorough way of just saying, hey, I'm at this point in my experience and my life and my journey, and this is the way I see it. And so I think that was really refreshing to hear sort of a master composer, musician, experimentalist, improviser, an inventor, and just a general lover of music and lover of creativity, have just such definitive and sort of answers for a lot of these difficult questions that all creatives ask. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode and just hearing Robert's perspective that has, been there and back, and has had a lot of great times, and some difficult ones too along the way. So without further ado, let's learn a little bit more about Robert and listen to an excerpt from his piece, Mitochondrial Ballet. Robert Dick has been described by the New York Times as a flutist whose technical resources and imagination seem limitless. Robert Dick has dispensed with preconceptions about what a flutist should sound like and what a flutist should play. A revolutionary composer, performer, and improviser, he has literally redefined the flute for our age. He began composing and improvising in the 1970s, driven by the core idea that acoustic instruments can be played as human-powered synthesizers, and by his love of continuous transformation of sound. Listening to Robert Dick play solo has been likened to the experience of hearing a large ensemble, an ensemble in which the instruments seem both acoustic and electronic and freely morph into each other. Robert has performed and recorded with an extraordinary array of musical personalities, including Steve Lacy, John Zorn, and many others. Robert's invention, the glissando head joint, has revolutionized the essential sound of the flute, doing for the flute what the whammy bar does for the electric guitar, and bringing a vocal quality that is entirely new to the instrument. On today's episode, we listen to Mitochondrial Ballet from Robert's album Our Cells Know, released on Tzadik Records.
Creativity is just the life force itself.
Absolutely.
If you want to ask a real expert about creativity, talk to the nearest toddler. And because, hand a 2-year-old anything that she or he has not seen before, hopefully nothing dangerous,
Yes.
and just watch what they do with it. It's something that you would never, ever, as an adult, think of.
Right.
And so we're born in a creative state.
Absolutely.
And if, there are all these terminologies, but the creative journey is to find a way back to that state in childhood. And if one can actually manage it, to revisit that more or less at will, then you're able to create.
So, Robert, as an adult now, what object, hopefully a safe one, what object do I hand to you to start the creative process for you? What is it?
Well, you could hand me a flute of some kind.
Right.
Although my music is certainly flute-centric,
right,
in many ways it's not really about the flute.
Yeah.
It's about, my interior world, and I'm using the tool that I have the most facility with. And of course I have that facility because I love the flute.
Absolutely.
So handing me one of those would be a very good...
Probably a good idea, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So after somebody has handed you the flute and you're working out an idea, you list yourself as an improviser as well as a composer and a musician. So, what's the order of that in the creative process? Are you beginning with just pure improvisation? Do you have a plan, or is it literally just you're handing yourself the flute, or a deadline or a commission is handing you the flute, right, to do something? So is it just pure improv when you begin the creative process, or is it more organized?
It's different every time.
Absolutely.
I don't have like a fixed kind of approach.
Sure.
On the compositional side of things, sometimes, I will start improvisationally.
Sure.
And then, hit on something and they go like, okay, there's the piece.
Yeah, that sparked the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, it's a very different experience for me if I'm actually going to write all the notes on paper or not. Most of the music I make it never gets written down. And most concerts I play are completely improvised, and the document would be the recording.
Yeah.
And so, but if I am planning to write something down, oftentimes the biggest part of the most difficult stage is developing the concentration where I can enter the world where that piece is playing, and then I can leave it to do the things I need to do, and then be able to re-enter it fairly freely, and oftentimes the first period of work on a piece is nothing, in the end, is nothing more than that. And I'll find that all the stuff that I wrote with such difficulty goes like, well, okay. It's very rare that any of that stuff gets salvaged for use later. I mean, once in a while you write something and it's just not going to work in the piece you're doing, and you save it and it gets useful later. But very often all of that stuff was just the spiritual calisthenics, and then finally, like, okay, I understand what this piece will be. And occasionally a piece is very nice and it'll tell you right away what it's about. But often they can be pretty taciturn.
So does performance part of this process too? So sometimes when you're approaching an upcoming performance, do you have pieces that maybe are still sort of arguing with you a little bit, and maybe through performance you can find some of the answers for
yes, for definitely. I've had that experience many times where I know that in this situation, it's on. I am going to go end to end, and very often I found the thing I was struggling to find just came to me in the performance. So there really is something about the collective energy in the room when there are other people there, and there's really something about the reality that I'm going to play something.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think it's the feedback from the audience, or do you think it's just the sheer terror of performance? Just I'm up there and I have to, people are coming to see something.
Well, I'm happy to say that in this long phase of my life, performing is something I welcome. And there's no terror.
I think it was just the kind of more of the general, like, every situation is sort of like this uncontrollable thing that you just jump into. But you welcome it. I
do. And if I haven't played for people in a while, then I get very,
absolutely. You're like, why am I in a funk? I don't understand. And it's like, I haven't picked up the flute in a while.
Well, I pick up the flute pretty much every day, but I haven't played for people.
Okay. So that's the distinction.
I'm not somebody who only works when there's a deadline or a project.
Right.
And in a way, like this recent pandemic period where a lot of us spent a lot of time at home.
Yes.
And my solo playing, took a giant leap forward in that time. My ensemble chops got a little rusty.
Maybe a little rusty,
but that comes back as you do. So it's both the internal adrenaline, and it is the fact that playing for people does give something that isn't there when they're not there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like, this giant crowd. A couple of months ago, I played this tiny concert in Germany with another flutist, Ulrike Lenz. one of the best improvising flutists in the world who nobody knows about. And, we have a duo CD that nobody knows about. And we played in her living room for 3 people.
Yeah.
Because, the COVID lockdown thing and where she lives is not that easy to get to. And so, and yet it had the same intensity as would have been if there were, 30 or 300 people there. And none of this music was written; it was all improvised.
I see.
And there was a pianist in New York, Stephanie Stone. Irving and Stephanie Stone were the ultimate improvised music fans. And there were decades where, it wasn't actually a real gig if Stephanie and Irving hadn't been there. Well, Irving died, and some years later, so did Stephanie. And the reason John Zorn's performance space is called The Stone is in honor of the Stones.
Yeah.
And this email went around that there's going to be a memorial, and I wrote to him. I said, "Look, will there be a couple of minutes for me? I would really like to play something for Stephanie." He said, "Sure." So I thought, I want to do something special.
Yeah.
And normally I don't drag the contrabass flute around to, door gigs or in this case there was no money. It was just we were just doing this.
Yeah.
And but I thought, for Stephanie, I'll do something more. Yeah. And I worked on some ideas, which, in all honesty, I don't actually remember that well, but they were very vivid then.
Yeah.
And John got very excited and asked me if I would make a contrabass flute album. And I wasn't really sure I could do that. In fact, I had a lot of doubts that I could do a whole contrabass flute album. And I thought, well, maybe we could just do low flutes. I could bring the bass,
right,
and then the bass flute in F. Because I have a flute that's between the bass flute and the contrabass flute, and I spent a lot of time improvising away over the months before the session, and then the day arrived. We'll go out to this studio. The entire thing was done in about 2.5 hours. Yeah. When I got home that evening, I've rarely been as tired. I was drained.
It was like running a marathon on top of a marathon. Yeah.
It is the best solo improvisation I've recorded to date. And the reason I feel that is that during that entire session, I spent incredibly little time thinking about myself.
Yeah.
The goal, of course, is to not think about yourself at all.
Which is impossible. But yes. Maybe not for this 2 hours.
Impossible. Well, I got closer than I've ever gotten to it.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned the word honesty before. And so, yes, it was just really honest.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I have been listening to African music for a long time.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful collection of CDs that were recorded in Africa in the 40s and 50s and 60s. It was this British guy who took a recording caravan out into the bush. Sure. And he had this incredible way of finding great musicians, and somehow they trusted him.
Yeah.
And so there's like 26 of these CDs. I am particularly enamored of the drumming. Now, I never have studied African drumming formally. Right. And what I've done is I've listened a lot and just tried to absorb it and then find a way to, integrate it into my music. And so there's a lot of percussion stuff in particularly in Mitochondrial Ballet. Yeah. And then also there's one later on in the CD called After Image Before, which I dedicated to my favorite rock drummer, who had been Ginger Baker. I mean, it was a close contest, between Keith Moon and Ginger Baker, and Ringo was in a different category. Just pure taste, and I love Ringo's playing, but these African drummers, and of course, when you're doing this with your fingers, there's also a big physical challenge to that. Yeah, and so this is something I've been developing over years and years. Well, is being creative a primal urge? Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Why else would we do it?
Right.
I mean, the legitimate question also is, well, look, what else would you do?
Right.
And anything else I would do, I would feel like, I'm just selling the time.
Right.
I certainly feel it's a good year if, I've made some new pieces, or if I've recorded, a CD or two.
So it's linked to what you produce or what you create or what you improvise. That's defining you in some way, or?
Yeah. Well, I heard Elliot Carter say something very sweet and very true. Mm-hmm. He was introducing a concert of his music. Of course. And, it was the Elliot Carter first team, Ursula Oppens and Rolf Schulte and, folks like that. Mm-hmm. And he said, people ask me, also about my music and about myself. And he said, actually, my music says far more about me than I ever could.
Yeah.
And that's really true.
What about though when it's not going well? Because especially somebody like you that has a career as long as you had and have had the experiences, it's not always this great, fulfilling, identity affirming process. Sometimes it can be a bit of a struggle. And do you feel that? Do you feel that struggle? Well,
of course. Yeah. Of course. I mean, we all are, living here in the material world. And, yes, it can be a struggle. And There are many people playing much less creative music than I do who are making much more money.
Well, what if you had to stop? What if you had to stop improvising because at the concerts people were screaming too loud? You know, I'm thinking of the Beatles example of not touring anymore because, you know, they would go to shows and it would just be young women screaming. I mean,
as my grandmother would have said, you know, you should have such problems.
Problems, right? Yeah. Yeah.
But the fact that there isn't a huge audience for my music doesn't make me stop playing it.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes when you ask, is it not going well? My first thought was during the compositional process, sometimes things are not going well.
Yes. That is the struggle within the larger struggle.
And there have been plenty of times when I've, you know, said like, why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah.
But the feeling at the end where there's a piece where there was no piece before is indescribably great.
Yeah.
And you know, the great flute maker Albert Cooper said once, he said, it can be really hard at times, but the feeling when it's done and you hand it to the player, he said, it's for me, it's the greatest feeling.
Well, Robert, this has been fantastic talking with you. I just love some of your experience and your takes on this whole creative process and this idea. Before I let you go, where can we go to find out more about you, about this album, and just about your music in general?
Number one, of course, would be robertdick.net. Number two would be if you go to YouTube and you do Robert Dick Flute, that will sort me out from a number of other things. And I have quite a few both performance videos, there's solo ones, and there are also some really good ensemble concerts. And, you know, there's particularly a trio with Adam Kane playing electric guitar and Tiffany Whiten Chang playing drums. There's also a remarkably good, if I may say so, duo concert with the pianist Ursel Schlicht, which can be found on Roulette TV. And, you know, these days, nobody has any place to hide anymore.
Thanks to Robert for sharing his time and music with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out other episodes in the series, and as always, like, subscribe, or leave a comment on your preferred podcasting app. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and this has been The Process.